Page 239 of The Unfolding is the story of Jamie MacDonald.
I constantly struggle with the enemy accusing me of who I used to be. It was hard for me to see myself not scarred and broken. The biggest lie the enemy had over me is, what makes you think you could stand up and sing in front of these people? Don't forget, you're just a high school dropout.
God's story has been unfolding.
Since the beginning of time.
He invites you to be a part of it.
Wow. Another page in The Unfolding.
Hey, this is Meredith Foster. Jamie MacDonald has become known for a song that raced its way to #1 earlier this year. Desperate. It's an anthem, a cry to God for help and breakthrough. And it was written by a woman who knows what it means to be desperate. Jamie grew up in a home where singing was banned and hope was hard to come by. After her parents' divorce and a rocky relationship with her stepfather, Jamie was kicked out of the house at 15. For the next few years, she was couch surfing, living in group homes, no phone, no address, and no one to believe in her. But a seed planted at church camp when she was 12, an encounter with the love of Jesus, never fully died. Years later, tired of the chaos, Jamie cried out to God, a desperate prayer for help.
I was born in the peak of my dad's professional boxing career in Nashville, Tennessee. And so it was a crazy time for our family. My mom really was kind of on her own, raising 2 young girls. And my dad was traveling a lot, and he ended up fighting the world title 3 times around the time that I was born. Although it was exciting, it was also a pretty unstable time to start a family. One hard thing about that was my dad had a gambling problem, and we would wait all year for him to have a fight, because that's when you'd get a decent paycheck, and then he would try to multiply the money and lose it all. My parents just really struggled, and they ended up getting a divorce several years later, but we lived a lot of rough years where my mom was just on her own raising us. And my dad always loved Jesus, but he had a lot of different addictions and different problems, and just the life of a pro boxer is just crazy. Mostly I remember during those years trying to stay out of the way. My mom seemed pretty unhappy, and so she was waitressing every night. We were with babysitters a lot, and I just don't remember a lot of good memories of my childhood. But by the time my parents divorced, things got even harder when my mom was fully on her own, single mom now of 3 kids. And felt the same way, just don't have a lot of needs. I kind of became very isolated and reclusive, and I remember playing quietly with my sister a lot, but I don't remember many happy, joyful moments. And my mom just really struggled. And so sometimes she would have to steal to provide for us, to steal food. And so that was really tough. After a number of years of my mom struggling on her own, she met somebody and got married for the second time. And this man provided a lot of stability for us. And so we all moved towns, and basically we moved into his home. And that's when kind of things shifted into even darker place for me personally, because I didn't get along with him at all. And he really loved my mom, but never wanted kids. His rule for me was no singing in the house. The one thing that I loved the most was music and singing, and it was just kind of choked out from the time I got into his house. I was doing music in school and kind of being celebrated for it among my peers and doing different singing competitions at school, but at home I would get punished for it. But it was just this really confusing back and forth. And my mom still seemed pretty unhappy with him, but I think it was just something she was sticking with for stability reasons. We just were don't mess this up for us. We had to just be on our best behavior. I grew really angry during those years. I started doing self-harm, started doing really bad in my classes, and just rebelling in a lot of different ways.
How old were you when your parents divorced?
See, that's a little hard for me with the details, because I'm mostly just remembering. I'm pretty sure I was around 7 or 8 when my parents divorced. We never really saw our dad after that. He'd come around once in a while to pick us up, take us to his side of the family for Christmas maybe, but it ended up that we really never had a relationship with our dad after that. And
that's hard.
Yeah, it was tough. And then my mom remarried around, I think I was about 11.
Was faith ever, anywhere along the way for your mom, your dad, or was it a part of your home?
Yeah, my dad, for sure, when we were kids, like when he was home from the fights, he would sing to us Christian songs that he was actually writing. He wasn't much of a musician or a singer, but he really thought he had it. So he would sing to us and teach us the Bible, and he was pretty extreme in his faith. So, anytime they would pass him the microphone for like a televised fight, they'd be like, Jim, tell us about the fight. And he'd be like, Jesus is coming back. Don't get the mark of the beast. And, he'd have all these intense like things to say about Jesus. And so they'd be like, and go to commercial, because he was always saying like the funniest stuff. And his boxing logo was like a Jesus Ixtus fish. He was just he got saved kind of as a young, maybe he was like 18 or so. He was a big troublemaker growing up. And then he gave his life to Christ through like the witness of his grandma teaching him and his brother about Jesus. And so he had his own conversion, but he was always still a bit of a wild one, but really all in for God. So I would say there was definitely a heritage of faith planted in me from a young age that was very radical, just like Jesus is coming back. Sometimes my dad would say, don't plan for your next birthday. Jesus will be back by then, and I'd just be like, this summer I want to go and da-da-da. And he'd be like, well, I wouldn't make any plans if I were you. And he was just really, really intense about it. But some of that was really beautiful. I still say to this day, like, he's one of my heroes when it comes to faith, because he just really was all in for God, and he memorized scripture constantly. But my mom was raised in a Christian home as well. Her parents were both heavily into church and sang in church. My mom had a faith of her own that I think just weakened over time when she was struggling and going through so much as a single mom. My mom's had her own journey, and now she's really walking with the Lord, and she's now married to a former worship leader and a gospel singer. So it's been a pretty redemptive turnaround in our story, because now our house is filled with music.
When was the first time that you had a personal, I don't know whether to call it an encounter or experience, but where it was something like personal for you?
So I got invited to church camp at the age of 12, and it was right around that age where I was starting to do self-harm, struggling with anger issues, starting to do pretty bad in my classes. And some of our friends had gone to camp the year before, and it was just talking about how fun it was. And a lot of it had to do with the lake and the fun toys and the games. Little did we know, my best friend and I were signing up for giving our lives to Jesus. And so my best friend and I go to camp. I was so marked by the singing and the love of the counselors. I felt like that was one of the first times where I really felt understood and loved by adults, because I was doing so bad in school. So all my teachers were just like, I was a little pain in the butt. And at home, I didn't feel loved, or I really felt like no one believed in me, and just struggled. Everybody struggled in our family. So it just wasn't the atmosphere to really feel loved and safe. And the counselors really facilitated that and brought the presence of God and just joy into my world. And I remember the songs we sang at camp, and so much singing. It was like the opposite of my home life. It's like we never stopped singing at camp. Even in the morning, there was the morning camp wake up songs, and you march your way down to the lake and you're singing something. And there was a sermon one night, and the pastor is just so funny. I can't remember a sermon from last week, but I'll never forget the sermon from camp at 12 years old. And I think God made sure my best friend and I didn't forget, but it was about staying on the A plan. And so it's like the B plan is falling into sin and falling away from God. I remember the picture was so clear. It's like plan A is being all in for God and not letting yourself fall off into sin. And so my best friend and I gave our lives to Jesus that night, and we just made a pact, like, we're sticking with the A plan. And throughout the years, I actually, when I got home from camp, I got right back into my same atmosphere at home. It was a high that I was on at camp, but when I got back, it just wasn't sustainable to keep that. We tried for a couple months, Melissa and I, that's her name, my best friend. We started a Bible study in our school, and we'd have kids showing up before class to pray in this classroom, and it ended up growing to be like 50 kids, and we had to have a youth pastor come and host it. So it was like a really radical change for us, and people didn't know us for that before, but it was cool to see. We come home from camp, and now we're just like on fire for Jesus and getting kids to follow at our school. But that was around the age of peer pressure, and around 13, I started getting into drugs and alcohol and getting around the wrong crowd. I think probably a couple of years of failing my classes and smoking pot, skipping school, really put a damper on my relationship with my friends and my family. My stepdad and I still couldn't get along. I ended up getting kicked out of their house by 15. And then I was in and out of group homes. I was happy to be out of the house because I was so unhappy there. But that was what began 5 of the darkest years of my life, where I didn't have a job. I didn't have a phone. No one could reach me. I just lived with drug dealers and went to parties and slept on whatever couches I could. I ended up in a rescue mission shelter. I had nowhere to go, and I really fell away from God and got really, really lost.
What about your best friend? Did you guys diverge?
Yeah, she and I, because no one had personal cell phones then, it was just hard to find me. And we'd bump into each other at parties and stuff occasionally. I had moved a couple towns over to a pretty bad town and pretty dangerous, rough area. But occasionally we'd pop in and I'd see her at a party, and she was also drinking and fell off in her own way, not as bad as I did. But we'd bump into each other and we'd just grab each other by the shoulders like, we've got to get back on the A plan. In a drunken stupor, we would just like, this is not it. This is not what we're supposed to be doing. We've always been that voice for each other. But around 18 years old, she came and found me where I was living. I was living with my boyfriend, and we had made a plan since 3rd grade that we were going to move to LA together when we turned 18 to pursue our dreams. She graduated high school. I didn't, but she came and found me and said, I'm leaving for LA in 2 weeks. Are you going or not? And I just looked around at my life and I thought, heck yeah, let's get out of here. And so I get in the car with her and we head to LA, and I lived out there for about a year. I fell into the wrong crowd in LA again, got into some dangerous situations where it caused me to pray for the first time in a really long time. And I just said, God, if you can get me out of this safely. I mean, people were making threats for my life at the time. I just said, God, if you can make this disappear, I'll move home and I really will sing for you and give my life to you, and not for my own glory. I'll sing for your glory for the rest of my life if you can just save me out of this. And I have a journal entry that I wrote with that exact prayer, which is so cool to have. Wow. But God did a miraculous turn of events and got me just out of that situation. And I immediately moved back to Michigan, and I was set to I want to live for God. My life was a mess. I was still doing drugs. Yeah, 18, probably about to turn 19, because I lasted a year in LA. So I was maybe just turning 19. And on the way home, I bought this ring, and it was my promised ring to God that I was going to sing for him, this opal. It's my birthstone. I got it at a little pharmacy. Like I said, I was still pretty messed up, and I didn't have a way to just start my life over. I was selling drugs at the time. When I got back to Michigan, I just had nowhere to go but back in with that same boyfriend. And so I moved back in with him. Things had gotten even darker there. Some of my friends were overdosing. A couple of people went to prison, to jail. And I'd be drunk and high at night, and I'd just look around the room and I would just hear the voice of the Lord just say, this isn't the end of your story. This isn't where you belong. And I would zone out, and people would tap me hey, are you good? You haven't said anything in an hour. But I was hearing God's voice, and I didn't know at the time that's what I was hearing, but he was really calling me out. And I would think about those camp songs and just what he said to me when I was a little girl, that you're loved and I have a plan for you, and it's the A plan. I knew I was way far off from the A plan, and I made that promise in LA. I want to live for God. I was wrestling with the old me versus who I wanted to be. I didn't have anywhere else to go, but I just started to pray and respond to that voice. Okay, God, if this is you and you're saying there's another life for me, how do I get there? How do I get out of here? Where do I go?
Jamie knew she wanted a new life, but she had no idea how to get there. Her family, old friends, those relationships had been cut off. She was in a place where she felt desperate.
I didn't have a relationship with my family or anything. I'd burned a lot of bridges. And so a friend who actually was a part of the church, from the church camp when I was little, she lived a couple cities over in a college town. And I got a hold of her and I just said, hey, do you have room? Can I come live with you for a little while? I just rededicated my life to Jesus and I want to get in the church. She had been away from her faith as well. And so she let me come sleep on her couch. And I'm like, we got to go all in for God. So we start going to a Calvary Chapel church and reading our Bibles, and slowly but surely, God just started transforming me. It was really through the Word, because everything I needed was in there. So I was just devouring the Bible. Oh my gosh, this book is alive, and I'm seeing now how I'm supposed to be living. And I just wanted to know everything immediately because I was like, I'd been living in darkness for so long that the light was just so appealing. And I love to worship and gospel music. I started listening to CeCe Winans and Natalie Grant. And shortly after that, I got invited on a mission trip to Africa. My mom had recently rededicated her life to Jesus and married the worship leader of her church. I had started attending a church in a small town. After living with my friend in Ann Arbor, I moved again to a bit of a smaller town, lived with my aunt for a while. At that church, they had an altar call, and I was still very new in my faith. And they said, if anyone feels called to missions, just come to the altar. And I just thought, I would love to go to another country and share the gospel. It just always sounded cool. And so I went up and I had this encounter with God at the altar, and I really saw myself in Africa. And I was sitting on the ground and I could feel the dirt and the kids crawling on my lap, and we were laughing. And I had a full-on vision of Africa. When I was done praying, I was just like, God, what was that? I was there and I got to go to Africa. And so a week later, I hear from my mom, and her and I hadn't talked in a long time. And she just said, I thought of you this week. A lady came and spoke at our church and said she'll take anyone to Africa that wants to go. She has a house there and she lives there 6 months out of the year and has started an orphanage. And so anyone's welcome. She's like, I don't know why I thought of you, but here's the info. And so I called the lady, and shortly after, I'm in Africa and doing a month-long mission. And it's just cool. Everything I had been reading in my Bible, I was seeing right in front of me. The sick were being healed, people getting delivered of unclean spirits and all that stuff. And I was like, whoa, this is really great training, because I'm reading and then I'm seeing it before my eyes. And so I spent a whole month in Africa, and I hadn't sang in a long time, but they tried to push me up to preach one Sunday because they thought, surely if you're sent this far across the world, you have the message of God, you have the word of the Lord. And so I'm like, I promise I don't have a word of the Lord. I don't even know the Bible yet. But so I was like, I better start singing because I'm up here and everyone's like, go, go. So I just started singing this gospel song a cappella, and it was my breaking moment to start singing and to start singing for God. And so it was like I was forced to do it, but it was perfect. And they all started joining in. And by the end of this song, it was this big explosion, and everybody was worshiping and dancing. And I was like, okay, I'm singing for God now.
How long had it been since you had sang in front of somebody? Had it been years?
Years. I mean, even when I was in LA, like I was singing in the studio a little bit with rappers. So for those 5 years that I was living in the dark, I would only sing in the studio if I was drunk or high. They could get me to go sing, but I was so broken and so insecure, I would never open my mouth to sing. It was really from my childhood. I just had this like inner vow, and singing just became so painful that I kept it in. And that's really what broke it out of me.
Was that the first time you thought that maybe God was calling you to do that? Or you had such a gift and a passion for it?
Well, I had the promise I made to God in LA that I would sing for him, because I've always loved to sing. But really, that was my first moment of fulfilling that promise, singing for God.
How powerful.
And so when I got home from Africa is when I joined the worship team with my mom and my stepdad.
What a cool redemption moment in your story. That's crazy.
Yep. And so from a house that had no music is now a house filled with music. And my stepdad's an amazing musician and singer. He's a great writer. And he was in gospel quartets for years, as well as being a worship leader. And my mom can also sing. She's been shy about that over the years, but God totally redeemed that too. And yeah, it's just been really beautiful. But from then on, I continued to do mission work. I went to India and the Philippines and did some teaching, music teaching there. Really just stayed behind the scenes. I started writing songs later in my 20s and just like very soft. I was still a little bit shy with my voice and kind of still healing a lot on the inside. It took a while for me to be ready to shine on the outside. He was doing like a lot of work inwardly for me. So I really just got in with churches. I moved from city to city looking for where I belong and finding a family in God's family around the world, around the U.S. and beyond, just finding the body of Christ and getting brought in by so many believers. And they just cheered for me. And I did a couple crowdfunded records of my first songs and started releasing music. A lot of that was still pretty timid singing. And so it's a step-by-step process to get where I am now, where I'm able to really let it out and sing with my full voice, which took a long time to find.
When you were doing those songs, were they worship? What was your style? What kind of songs did you think you were going to do?
The first few songs I started writing, I would go out to the sunset and bring my guitar, and I would just push record on my phone and just sing whatever came out. And I never been a great guitar player, but I just play really simple chords and really let the Lord sing through me or whatever was on my heart. And then I'd come home and listen through that and find stuff and say, ooh, that sounds like a chorus, or that sounds like a verse maybe. So that's kind of how I started, and everything was just very soft. And I was in the midst of facing a lot of my wounds from my childhood and letting the Lord into a lot of those places. My voice was very timid, and I would say it was like a Nora Jones, folky Christian music. And so my first record sounds very different than, and nobody knows where that is. I don't really advertise it, but I'm not ashamed of it at all, but it definitely doesn't sound like the same singer. I mean, you can just tell God really delivered me, really given me more authority, I guess you'd say. So from then, my folky record, I was like, okay, I'm listening to this, and I know there's more to my style, and I know that there's a soulful part of me that I'm not using, and a lot of it was confidence issues that I just wasn't ready to sing loud, feeling very timid and reserved and broken and stuff. And so through the years, as God has healed me, I feel like my voice has gotten louder, more soulful,
So cool.
with the more authority that he's given me. So my next record, I thought, okay, I'm going to find a producer that kind of specializes in more of a soulful sound. I started writing just more songs in my journal that reflected the next phase I was in with God, which was just faith and victory and not as many questions. I had a lot more answers, and I had taken a lot more ground in my identity. With that came bolder songs. And so I started writing, and I moved to Seattle and Portland, and I started writing there. And I hit another rough season in Portland. It rained a lot. I don't know if that had to do with it, but I got a little depressed, and I'm like, God, what do you want to do with my life? I can't seem to find where I belong and where I fit. And I want to sing for you, but I still don't feel the confidence to really go for it. I'm still just unsure and afraid to tell my story and afraid to get out there in front of everybody. So there's still work that God was doing in me. And I did a record out there that ended up not turning out the way I wanted it to. Came back to Kansas City to track in the same town that I did my first record with some of the same people, but this time everything was different and I was different, and I got a different producer. When we turned that record in, that was the music that got me on a couple TV shows. And so Oprah Winfrey Network used my title track, which is called Higher I Will Go. Then NBC The Rookie ended up using it. And so for the first time, my music was actually being heard in a bigger setting than just my friends and family.
Oh.
And these songs were about God, but they weren't overtly like spelling out the gospel, because I was really just writing from exactly what I was going through. I'm singing songs like, you're my reason, you're my peace. The more I breathe you in, the less I need. Like, I'm singing stuff like that straight to God, but some people might interpret that as a love song, so it ended up working for secular as well. But any Christian that heard it would obviously know what I'm singing about as well. So that was fun. And once I got those songs out on TV, I decided to move to Nashville to get around more of the industry and really go for music full time as a career.
You've talked about there were certain things that God needed to heal in you, a work that he wanted to do, like the time that you're in Seattle, there were still things in there that he wanted to work to change so that you could fully know who you are and your identity and take up that space, not be so timid. What were some of the keys to that process? I think there are a lot of people who are in that place, like they know that they are a beautiful daughter of the King, but they don't behave that way. They don't think that way. They don't live that way. They don't love that way. What do you think as you look back on it? What were some of the keys that helped that transformation in you?
Well, one, the Word of God, listening to audio Bible and letting that wash over me daily, because I constantly struggle with the enemy accusing me of who I used to be. And so when I look in the mirror, I know myself better than anyone, and I know the old me. And it was hard for me to see myself not scarred and flawed and broken. The biggest lie the enemy had over me is, what makes you think you're anybody special? What makes you think you could stand up and sing in front of these people? Don't forget, you're just a high school dropout and you've always been a disappointment. And so stepping into a room where everyone's looking at you, expecting you to open your mouth and share, it's like you have to know who you are to be able to do that. But I would say listening to the word of God to cancel every lie was huge for me. And then another thing was just singing songs of identity. I really clung to certain songs over the years that if it's the message I needed, I'll put it on repeat for a whole year and just sing it over myself. Even, songs like No Longer Slaves, songs like that, where it's like, I need to say that with my own mouth until I believe it. Music has been huge in bringing me out of all those lies that I believed for so long.
Can you remember one of the first times when you sang in your true identity? I mean, when you realized you were singing from a healed place?
Yes. It was actually recent. I got invited to sing in a women's prison in Georgia, and I hadn't really done any music. So from the time I moved to Nashville till now, the pandemic really put a big dent in my plan. So I had moved to Nashville. The pandemic hit like a year in. I was talking with labels and getting ready to sign as a Christian artist at the time. I was just like in the combo and not sure. It's like, God, is this you? Is this not you? The pandemic hit. I moved to Georgia to help take care of my dad and reunite with him because he was at the latter stages of Parkinson's and dementia from the boxing. And so that's a big part of my story. But I moved there, leave everything behind and lay the music down for about 5 years. And so singing in this prison, I got invited to sing in a prison toward the last few months of my dad's life. When I got there, something unlocked. I had been really struggling with going through that with my dad. It was just him and I in Georgia. And the way that those prison girls just carried me through that season and loved on me, it really brought me back to life and really reminded me I want to sing. I would sing with them, and we prepared for this huge concert where we had a whole choir within the prison that sang my songs with me. And they brought me just the most courage and strength. When I did that final performance with them, with the choir, I just felt myself come alive. And as I was singing my songs, it was the first time I was able to get lost in my own song and not think about what everyone's thinking about me or staring at me. Like I was just singing with all my heart because I love to sing. And this is my story. And this is my testimony that I was singing. And so I really felt connected. And then from then on, I started teaching songwriting in the prison. And I saw the way Christian music really impacts those women and keeps them afloat. And so I was like, girls, I'm getting offers to sign a record deal in Nashville. And that would mean I'd have to move away from Georgia and stop coming here weekly. But I want to do this for you guys because I know that if I can get a song on the radio, I can reach not only you guys with more music, but I can reach all the prisons at one time.
Wow.
So that's a big thing that really nudged me to go sign a record deal. It's just being able to reach these women in prison who really brought me back to life and in a powerful way.
That is so God, isn't it? He's redeeming their stories. He uses it as he's helping you step into your identity. It's just such a beautiful picture. You moved to Nashville. You do sign a recording agreement.
Yeah. So my dad passed in August of 2023, and it was the closing of that chapter, and God did some amazing things in my heart through reconnecting with my dad. But when I got back to Nashville, I really was still in a grieving process. My dad had just passed away. I closed up the chapter and moved to Nashville, and I started getting in writing rooms, and everyone was just like, so tell us about you. What's going on in your world? You're a new artist on the scene. And I'm just like, guys, I'm broken right now, and this is where I'm at. My dad just passed, and I've been laying the music down for 5 years. I haven't released anything. I don't have the victory bop for anybody right now, but they're like, that's okay. Let's write from that place. And so everybody just loved on me and met me right where I was and said, no, we need to write about that. And so it really helped me process through a lot of the grief, and songs like Desperate. And I have quite a few others in my arsenal that aren't out, but that we wrote out of that season. And Desperate was one that really was just perfect because I had been desperate for quite a few years. And those were the lyrics that I felt like I needed the whole time. But when it came time to really write those and sing those with Jonathan Gamble and Jordan Sapp, I just had all the passion from those years. Like, oh, I've needed to say this. And this is how I felt for so long. So it almost felt like it was all bottled up. And that song let me really let it all out.
Can you share just a little bit of the lyrics from that?
I would say maybe like, I love verse 2. It comes in and it just says, prayed all the prayers I can pray, but I won't stop knocking until you open the door. You can move a mountain. You can calm a storm. I know that you can because I've seen it before. So that's like where the song kind of turns to faith, where it's like, I've seen you do it, God, and I'm not going to stop praying. And it's like that same prayer that Jacob prayed when he wrestled with the angel. I'm not letting go until you bless me. And it's just like a fervent cry. I'm begging you, God. I'm begging you for a miracle. And I'm not going to stop begging and praying until I see you move. And God honors those prayers. And we see that in scripture. So yeah, it's a tool for people. And it's been a tool for me as well.
And then new song coming out.
Yeah. So the song's called Who He Is. And really it's just like a feel-good gospel song about the faithfulness of God. I've been writing a lot of heartfelt, heavier stuff. And God's just done so much in my life, and I feel like I'm just entering into my happiest years, and I'm starting to write songs that reflect that. And this is just a faith song that's like, I don't know what's going on in the world, and I can't always predict what's coming next, but I do know who God is, and so I know I can trust and have faith He's going to take care of me. There's declarations of who He's been to me in the past, which gives me peace knowing that He's going to take care of my future as well.
What do you see ahead, and what has it been like for you?
I mean, I'm kind of processing as fast as I can, but it's all happening so fast.
Yeah.
And I'm looking around at my team. Is this how it normally goes? It's full throttle. And, I'm doing so many things I've never done before that it's like my head's spinning. But even just interviews, I'm new at that. I'm new at being live on the air or sharing my testimony. I'm new at that. And I'm getting invited to sing places, and my schedule's filling up this summer and fall with big events that feel just everything's new. I didn't get to warm up for this. I feel.
Yeah.
Like maybe inwardly God's prepared me, but as far as like actually playing live with a band, like all of that's going to be new. But mostly I'm just incredibly grateful that throughout all the years that I spent doing other things with letting God heal me, that it wasn't too late, and most people think by a certain age that you might have missed it. And I'm just surprised and just amazed that God could do all this when maybe I thought at times my story was over. You never know what God's calling you to. And I was fine if he was going to say, I'm not going to do anything big with your music, but I want you to keep singing in these prisons. Like I was ready to do that. And now He's allowing me to still sing in prisons and also adding more things that I maybe never even asked for, but He's just always doing more than we could ask or think, Yeah, it feels really good. And I'm just praying for the courage to step into those big shoes. Yeah.
He's brought you this far. He will do the same. He's good.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about those who are listening who maybe can relate to your childhood and having 5 dark years, and maybe for them it's been 10 or 15 or 20, and they have counted themselves out. You begin to identify yourself in certain ways. I'm a failure. I'm a loser. I'm whatever, fill in the blank. And just for those who are hearing your story and that you've experienced that transformation, what would be your words of encouragement?
I just remind them that when God created them in their mother's womb, that He had a plan for them, and that the devil can't take that away. And no matter what they've done, and no matter, how far they've run from God, He's ready to start over with them and give them a chance to live that beautiful life that they were created for. And I guess even just encouraging them that His love is unconditional. And so He doesn't see us the way we see ourselves, but He sees us through what Jesus did. And He sees us as perfect through Jesus. No matter what we've done, He chooses to forgive and forget our sin. I would encourage them to just ask God, how do you see me? And who do you say that I am? Because the world's going to tell us a lot of different things. But when we go straight to Him and say, God, who am I? He really will show you, and He really will tell you, and you begin to heal your identity and show you what He's calling you to.
Jamie's story is a reminder that no one is too far gone and no past is too messy for redemption. If her journey spoke to you, share this episode with a friend, and we would love to hear your story too. Head over to the Unfolding Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. Check out Jamie's music, including her new song, Who He Is, streaming everywhere you listen to music. You can also follow at Jamie MacDonald Music on Facebook and Instagram, and visit her website. I've got links to all of those in the show notes. Huge thanks to Jamie for sharing her story. Thanks also to the awesome team behind this episode, Michael Shermack, Lindsay Caparoon, and our producer and network director, Jason Rackow. The Unfolding is a production of Faith Podcasts. You can find more great shows at myfaithpodcast.com. If you enjoyed this story, take a second to follow, rate, or leave a kind review. It really helps us spread these powerful stories. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week with another page of The Unfolding.